All right, so it's 6:30, and we're going to call the Ad Hoc Capital Debt Committee to order. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Sure. Find my paper. I have the wrong sheet, I apologize. Oh, here it is. Director Photo,
Present?
Director Sullivan,
Present? Present.
Director Cummings,
Present.
Alderman Govea,
Here.
Alderman Clee is here, Alderman Clevens,
Here.
Alderman O'Brien, Alderman Wilshire,
Here.
and Mayor Dodges.
Here. All right, well, we're going to move to discussion, but we do have, I think, 1 hour because we've got the Budget Committee meeting right after, right? So I will turn it over to Mr. Cummings, who will help us proceed through the meeting.
Thank you, Mayor. So Tim Cummings, Director of Administrative Services. Some of you should have received some emails from me over the last week or so, providing you with the various documentations. One is up on the screen this evening. I'm going to take a moment and just talk through the latest communication that you got through me from earlier today, which I hope puts a little bit more of a finer point on how this tool could be used for the city's benefit. So just want to orientate everyone. Next sheet shows the capital expenditures broken out over a 5-year time frame. Something I want to note, CFO Griffin and I had a conversation about what would be an appropriate level of capital expenditures to budget to be appropriated annually. And I believe it would be he and I's recommendation about 3.5 million. Well, that would be about $2.5 million increase than we're currently doing. I say that to you because you can see on the bottom how that kind of figures into the planning, and we can adjust accordingly. And so with that being said, I say that because, again, just to give context, I created a category down here, and I'm going to use for this conversation the Riverside Athletic Fields at $2 million. And so I denoted that I thought maybe some additional study would be necessary, some more guidance from the community. And with that being said, I had outlined that to move up beyond this category, you should receive a resolution from the Board of Aldermen that would basically establish its priority and outline that it has been identified as a project that is worth doing, and there's been a demonstrated or a substantiated need. Don't necessarily at that time need to have any type of approval for cash or dollar amount. We could do that in the annual budget, but what I would suggest we do is, knowing that that is a priority, in the annual budget, you could set aside a certain amount of money in the capital expenditure line item. And so for this conversation, I'm going to just say something like here in FY26, we could plug in $200,000 to start design using cash. And $200,000 off of a $2 million project, about 10% of what we believe would be the total project cost, is a very reasonable number to use. And we could start developing the design. And once we had that design further developed, that would help us have a better understanding of total project cost. That would be the number that we would use to seek an additional resolution. That resolution would actually be the debt service resolution. And we could then program it in up here, somewhere where appropriate. We could obviously authorize the money earlier than we actually, when we use it, but we could fit it into the plan accordingly if that was the desire of the body. So I had sent you all an email earlier today that outlined in very high level concepts how this tool could be used, mainly from a financial planning perspective. So with that being said, Mr. Mayor, I provided the document to everyone. I know there was some interest in reviewing this document, having some time to digest it. I'll leave it to the body if they want to start asking questions about the various elements of this, but I think folks have had a chance to review it at this point in time.
Any questions? Alderman Clemmons.
Yeah, and forgive me if I missed it or don't see it, or if something else came up of it, but I didn't see the fire station floor on here anywhere for Amherst Street.
So if you look under here, you'd see right here, fire, capital maintenance, Amherst, Conant roof, so Amherst Street would be the floor.
Oh, okay, thank
and-
you.
And then it's
Yep,
programmed in.
I did see that, thank you.
If I may, Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
what I endeavored to do was try to put up above the subtotal list here, what I believe I heard from the community, from speaking to various members of the body, what had sufficient support to receive this level of attention. And that's obviously subject to conversation, but I did this as a way to really start the conversation with everyone, knowing that there was this second idea of trying to be able to use cash to pay for some of the smaller projects, so we could figure out a way to try to pay for everything.
All right, anyone else? We did not mention that Alderman Tebow and Alderman Dowd are here, not members of the committee. Alderman Tebow.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not on the committee, but one of the questions I have is, obviously, nothing baked in here has any like grant money that could come in the meantime as the years go by, right? So there's potentials that we, for some of these projects, a little bit of money comes in from other sources, which reduces the bond, correct?
If I may, Mayor. That's absolutely true. That's one of the reasons why this should become part of our practice to annually review this. And I would suggest we get in the habit of annually looking to authorize a certain level of debt. And we can take some of that alternative revenue into consideration when you're building out your total project cost. It would be something that we could do when we're in the design phase of a project, and that would help maximize the dollars that we have.
Just to follow. And it looks like from what I see on here, you guys pretty much said, hey, whatever we need, let's get it in on the spreadsheet. Pie in the sky, like Mount Pleasant's on there for 25 million or whatever, and then Elm Street's on there. So you guys put everything on there, is that correct? Like just to have it and then have conversations about it afterwards, is that right? Or is there anything left off?
Mr. Mayor, I programmed everything in, but there is more conversation necessary.
Okay, thank you very much.
Alderman Clemmons.
Thank you. So one of the items was the Main Street rehab, as it's listed. And, it's contemplated, I believe, 6 million being a match. Where, in reality, where would that be? Like, do we have that match? Do we know that's gonna happen? Like, how far along are we?
If I may, Mayor, I'd turn it over to Director Sullivan.
Mr. Mayor, members of the committee, just to give an update on where we're at with that project, we have submitted a request to USDOT as part of the RAISE grant program to seek several $1 million in RAISE grant funding to do the design work for the project. That specific design work, because of the area that the work is in, downtown, does not require a match, so we're cleared to proceed. In the event that we get the grant, we would be cleared to proceed without a match for that. What we've anticipated, however, is a subsequent RAISE grant application for the actual construction. We're trying to be conservative, I think, in saying that if we were to receive a $30 million grant for reconstruction of the corridor, it would be wise of us to carry a match for that $30 million. But I want to be clear that we've not applied for that grant at this time. We've applied for the predecessor to that grant and would have to seek additional funding in a later year.
And how long do you think, well, first of all, when do you expect we will get an answer on the application for the design money? And number two, how long, were we to get that grant, would it take to complete the design?
My expectation is that we'll have an answer on whether we've received the funding by early to mid-July of this year. That's what USDOT has indicated, and we've seen that pattern in the past. We actually applied for this grant last year. My expectation is that if we were to receive notification of an award, we'd work expeditiously to accept the award, begin the design work within a series of months. I guess in an ideal world, we would advance the design to the extent that we'd actually be applying for a full construction grant in the next year. But it's possible that design process could take longer than 9 calendar months, and it may be, in fact, be 2 years that we'd be waiting to apply for full construction. So we're really looking at a 26 or 27 timeframe for actually doing that work, I think, in earnest.
Alderman Clemmons.
So my question there, and that this comes down to the timeline for me. So let's assume we get the grant and we're doing the design work, right? Part of that is to tell us exactly I would imagine, the project scope and what the estimate of the
Yeah.
cost would be, right?
Yeah.
So would you have to wait for that to be completed before you then went and said, okay, now I want to get the matching funds for the project?
It's a good question. I hope this answers your question. I think we need to be substantially complete with the design work and have a good sense of what the probable construction costs would be. We've had several corridor extents in mind as far as how far we want to go with reconstructing the Main Street corridor. I think it would be unwise of us to apply for construction funding until we actually understood what we can bite off and successfully chew as a community from a match perspective. So I guess what I'm really saying is, yes, I think we would need to be very close to complete on the design work before we could adequately estimate the actual match needed to then apply for the subsequent raised construction grant.
Alderman Clemmons.
Thank you. Okay, so that kind of helps me out a little bit on that. I did have one other question, because I didn't, and again, forgive me if I missed it, but I don't see anything on here in regards to rail. And I don't know if we have an answer from the MBTA yet, or what, where we're at on that, and if that would cost anything.
If I may, Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
So I won't speak to where we're at relative to the current study per se, but what we do know is to finish the design work, we anticipate it being somewhere around 1.5 million. It could be a little bit more than that. We'll know more as time goes on. But what we would need is to be able to proceed in relatively short order. So knowing that we could potentially use cash to finish that design work, I've programmed it in, as you can see on the screen, in FY27, which I think is reasonable based on where we're at. But of course, this is a good example of why what I would recommend is somewhere in the early spring, maybe late winter, always getting together and reviewing this document. So when we start to begin the budget process, we can see where there might be additional capacity. And I say this to go back to your prior comment, relative to this project here, there may be an opportunity to move this over a year or so. I mean, it's not necessarily going to affect the bottom line because you're still gonna have 149, but if there's something else that comes up along the way, we would have the capacity then to add in additional projects if need be.
Thank you.
Alderman Dowd.
Yeah, I'm looking at this and I know we're trying to limit the spending per year, but I noticed like some questions, the parking garages. Are we gonna hire the same company to do both garages, and can they do them simultaneously? And where I'm going to on this is, I think the concern we have as far as the budget is the debt service. So when we say like 15 million for those garages, are we looking at plugging it into a year where it's approved by the Board of Aldermen? Or when the contract is let and when the money is spent on each year? Or, or when the bond is sold, because all three could have different dates. So say we approve the 15 million for the parking garages, but we only spend half of it in '26 and half of it in '27, that would need to be reflected in this so that we're doing the certain amount of bonding per year. It's not what's approved by this board for bonding, it's what's going to be spent. Correct, John?
Mr. Mayor, if I may.
Yes, this is Mr. Griffin, CFO.
Yes, working with Tim, we're kind of trying to accomplish a few things simultaneously. At some point, I would like to see the spending plan such that in the first year, as we know, the schools are almost complete with construction. So it's prudent for us to bond those this fall. Mr. Cummings has 55 million on the spreadsheet to show not only what's been approved by the Board of Aldermen, but what could be approved, but really knowing when the projects are going to be completed and when we should judiciously bond is important too. So trying to accomplish a couple of things simultaneously, but my thought is that if one of the next projects is the 15 million, that will probably be bonded, depending upon when you start. That could be bonded the following year to get the cash to pay for what we're essentially borrowing from the Treasury,
Just a
city
follow-up.
Treasury.
Yes.
So, like, if we approve 15 million and the work progresses over a couple of years, you wouldn't go out and sell a bond for 15 million up front and then spend it. You would, don't you usually sell the bonds in anticipation of the expense? And the other thing is, like, we approved the 10 million for the McCarthy School some time ago, if I could read the date.
Right.
But you haven't even sold that bond yet, right?
Correct.
And there's a better than good chance that a good part of that's not ever gonna be spent.
Correct. We're anxiously awaiting how much of the 10
So am
million
I.
we're not going to spend. But clearly, if the McCarthy School is ready for opening this August, September, my recommendation would be to sell the amount that's been spent, or to be shortly spent if you have some punch list item. Now, what we do is we'd come forth with a rescinding resolution to drop the 10 million down to something less than the 10 million.
Yeah, so on that spending, we'll have a pretty good idea of what we can release from that bond come August 1st. But the final accounting for the project won't happen till like December, when we get the certificate of completion and Harvey signs off on, we're done. And all the bills have come in. We just had that issue with Franklin Street, finished a year ago, and we get a bill, you know, because they didn't send it in. That's all straightened out now, but.
So if I may, Mr. Mayor?
Yes,
So-
Mr.
so-
Cummings.
So, a couple points relative to what the conversation that we're having right now. One, there will be some fluidity with this, so if a project closes out, and it looks as though it's gonna close out underneath what the bond authorization figure is, similar to like what happened with the DPW office building, then you can repurpose those funds, and that may add some additional capacity in later years. There will be a little bit of a lag to when that occurs. Second, I think it's unfair at this time to try to conceptualize when some of this cash flow is necessary when we don't even have a certain level of design yet. I'll give an example, and I tried to do this with the DPW garage, in the fact that I don't know at this point in time if the DPW garage construction is a 1.5 year or 2 year project. And so to then try to forecast whether we need 20 million, 40 million, 30 million in a given year at this point in time is not fair to do. So I wouldn't want us to focus too much on the cash flow needs, but more so talk about whether it's a priority and something that there is an interest in doing an investment of. And then if that's the case, then we can work to massage through some of these details.
Alderman Clemmons.
Yeah, so I would assume that the $150 million here, or the $30 million a year, has an assumption built in on interest rates and what all of that would be. And I mean, to Alderman Dowd's point, if interest rates were to go down in the upcoming next 2 or 3 years, then our capacity could actually increase because the debt service would be lower.
That's right.
So there's a lot of things that play in this, but I think this is, we're looking at this plan as sort of a worst case scenario of hopefully the rates are as high as they're gonna get. Hopefully our AAA bond rating stays the same. And this is, you know, what we can do with what we have now, but obviously if the picture gets brighter in the future, which hopefully it will, then that capacity becomes higher than 30 million essentially.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, that's.
And CFO Griffin has tied this to a projected future budgets for bonded indebtedness, which, we've distributed and would be affected by the interest rate. Mr. Cummings.
Mayor, you said what I was just about to say. It's predicated on, principal and interest, even payments, 20 years. These were the base assumptions we made. Yep.
Alderman Govea.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Looking at this as a whole and kind of big picture, what I'm looking at now and what kind of concerns me is we're going right up to that 30 million a year. And I mean, if we plan this out so tight like we have it planned now, thinking we're gonna have no emergencies that need bonding in the next 5 years or no other priorities, I think we're kind of doing a disservice because this plan's gonna go out the window right as we have one emergency or one project that needs to get done. I personally would like to see us not bond right up to 30, but be somewhere in that 20, 25 million a year range. Gives you a nice comfort of 5 to 10 million a year. Maybe some years you have more, some years you have less. I just think we're stretching ourselves very thin and kind of setting up a plan that could easily go down in flames very quick if something was to happen in FY25 and we end up bonding even more money on top of this. I think it's a very tight line that we're on right now.
Alderman Clemmons.
Thank you. I tend to agree with my colleague from Ward 1 on this, but my thought is I'm wondering how much of these costs are inflated or we don't know the real number. Because, again, I would assume that these are worst case scenario numbers. So even if we are at 150 million or 149, whatever it is, how realistic are, I guess, some of these numbers, I guess, would be? I mean, some of them we know, right? Like the ones we already passed, the resolutions and stuff like that, we know. I would imagine some of them have design work done, I think. So how much of this how many of these are ballpark figures, I guess would be my question.
Well, I would say quite a few, right? I mean, but the assumption, they could come in lower, but, I mean, in experience says they're more likely to come in higher than come in lower, but, Mr. Cummings.
Thank you. Yes, Mayor, that's absolutely true. I'd like to believe the worst case scenario, and those of you who know and have worked with me, I tend to be very conservative. So I would say these numbers are inflated. With that being said, time is our enemy. Mm-hmm. And so then often what happens is because it takes so much time to do some of these things, then we get to a certain point, and the reality is we didn't set aside enough money because it took longer than what the original number was that we all gravitated to and want to hold on to. And so my last comment would be is some of these bond authorizations or projects on here don't have a level of design yet. And so one of the goals is to try to move us to a place where we start to get to a level of design, so there is more comfort level on some of these unknown assumptions that we're making with this plan.
Alderwoman Clee.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I hate to ask such a silly question, but what do the different colors mean? Up on your screen, the green, the blue, the orange, the red?
So those were color codes that I used just to help keep it straight in my mind. West Pearl Street streetscaping, I think some additional study is needed there, investigation on my part to make sure I understand the numbers to that. That goes hand in glove with the Walnut Street Oval, and making sure we actually know what that is. So that's why I colored that. And you'll see it corresponds with, over here, the Walnut Street Oval, because the resolution that was passed tied the two projects together.
Right.
So I just, that's my way of making sure I'm doing my due diligence to go back and research that. The hydro and the parking, though, it was asked early on in this process to identify projects that might have some revenue generation to it.
Okay.
And so I wanted to make sure that we did that. The green is operational related costs that I think we need to kind of spend some time talking about. I think it's a separate conversation and I want to have, and so I wanted to just highlight that. I think we're setting the money aside now, and that might give us time over 5 years or so to maybe start to have a conversation about planning to build in paving into another department or within the operational budget in some way. And then relative to the maroon, the orange, that is just something I identified because it wasn't clear to me whether the masonry windows repair project would actually proceed or not, depending on what the pleasure is of the body relative to a total project for the library. So, because that is a repair that was requested. I think it was requested in a way to say, if we're not going to do a total project, we definitely need to do at least this, and so that's why it's highlighted.
Alderwoman Clee.
Thank you very much, Director Cummings. I really appreciate that. Now, my question is, I don't know so much if it's a question, or I guess it is. When we were talking about ensuring that we have enough comfort built into this $30,000 per year, and to Alderman Gavea's comments, when you came up with it was $30,000 a year, right? The $30,000 per year was the safety of it. When you built that, did you build that with comfort? With the anticipation that there could be emergencies, or that there could be cost overruns, or just because of inflation?
So to answer your question simply, the answer is yes.
Okay.
But again, it goes back to one of the reasons why I think annually we need to keep looking at this.
Right.
And revisiting it, so we can have that conversation to make sure we're on track. So we can see where we maybe missed the mark, or we have a little additional capacity, and we can decide how we want to handle that in the following fiscal year. I do want to circle back to a comment that was made relative to planning, and I think it's a good policy discussion to be had, whether you want to set some money aside or not. Also, how much money do you want to set aside for, particularly for schools' deferred maintenance? And if you noticed here, and just so folks know, I'm planning to go before the Board of Education in the next few weeks to have a conversation with them regarding this tool. And I'm gonna propose the same question to them that I'm gonna propose to you now, which is, what is the expectation this community has for, if we all agree that $30 million is approximately the number we want to be using, understanding that with schools, we would need to set aside a certain percentage of that. In this plan, it's essentially a third, and that would, approximately $10 million, give or take. And if that's a reasonable number, that is a good guidance policy that we would want to inform the Board of Education. The Board of Education should in turn, tell us what is reasonable and what they would need. And maybe they'll say something different, but then you can accurately adjust the plan based on that percentage. And we can do that with the amount of contingency maybe that you want to hold aside year over year, whether you have a certain priority for the deferred capital maintenance within schools, or any other deferred capital maintenance item like that. But once we agree that there's the 30 million, then we can start to talk about the percentage breakdown that kind of goes into it, that we, staff-wise, can start to help provide some guidance to folks on, so we can, maintain this plan.
Alderman Clee.
I'm glad you brought that one up, because I was actually looking at those numbers in line 6 of the spreadsheet where it says schools, elementary schools, Birch Hill, you've got the, if I'm reading this right, 8.5 million, but you don't carry it over to the 25, 29 column. Was there a reason or just a faux pas?
It's a good, I don't know. I would have to double check that. I don't know why that didn't carry over.
Okay.
I think, I don't know. I'd have to double check that.
Okay. Thank you.
Alderman Dowd.
Yeah, I sort of agree with Alderman Govia to a point, but if we plan certain projects for a certain year and something comes up that's an emergency, if the project hasn't started yet, we can push it off. Also, all of these numbers, when you have any kind of bonded project, you're not gonna budget the bond down to the last dollar. If you do, you'll be adding to these, every single one of these as you go along. So typically, most of these will have money left over. Sometimes it's a little and sometimes it's more. It depends on how the project goes. But if you had something come up during a year and you had a project that was gonna start the following year, you can push that project off a year depending on what the emergency is. But if it's a real emergency, we don't have much choice but to address it. And hopefully, with most of these priorities we've set, some of these are already emergencies.
Alderman Clemmons.
Thank you. So I think that this segues into a pretty good, what could be a good discussion, I think, and could address what Alderman Govea brought up, without having to change the plan maybe too much. Because I'm wondering if we can get a better understanding of how much of the debt service, like, for example, the hydro dam would cover of that $7 million bond. And same thing with the garages. And then on the other two areas, you mentioned earlier that maybe putting the paving program into the budget in the future would be something that we could do. Well, I wonder if we could do it in fiscal year '29. Same thing with the school capital maintenance. Is there a plan or a way that we could get that to be not bonded, but rather saved for? So if you did something like that and there was some offsets there, you could probably theoretically have that buffer automatically built in without having to change anything that's on that spreadsheet, but just knowing the fact that some of these things have revenue sources or they have plans in the future to eliminate them from the list. And then that way, that would address some of these issues without having to actually change anything. So I don't know if we could get more solid numbers on some of that stuff I mentioned.
On number one, the hydro was your first example. Director Sullivan believes that we should create an enterprise fund for the hydro dams, the hydro facilities. And were we to do so, the revenue from those facilities would probably equal or exceed the costs, the annual costs of both debt service and operations for the two dams.
Excellent.
What was the number two? What was the second one?
The second one was the parking garages. Now, I understand that the fees are not gonna cover the
Right.
whole thing, but
Cover a little bit.
if the fees cover, let's say, the equivalent of $1 million of that 15, because let's do it that way, right? Then we can really look at that and say, okay, it's $14 million, or it's $12 million, whatever the number is.
And what was the third one?
The other two, one was paving, and then the other one was the school capital maintenance.
Now, the paving, even though this is on bond schedule, I mean, what this is suggesting is that once we finish the current 10-year project, that $4 million a year would be required to maintain a level condition of city streets. And
Okay.
that might be in the operating budget. I mean, you wouldn't want to continue to bond that every year, so that might be in the operating budget. So it is on a bonding schedule, but it's alerting you to the fact that, you know, there could be an operational fund increase to handle paving in fiscal '27 or beyond. That's fair to say, right?
Yes, correct.
So that's not really a bonding number.
Well, I think it's included in the 130, isn't it? I mean, the 150.
Is it included? Did you include that? So you're assuming we would bond that number?
Yes, and here's why, is because I think until we actually understand how that would impact the operational budget increase, and to be fair, I don't think that department would be able to make a guideline in the future years. And so we need to have that conversation up front, understanding that that is what's going to occur, and then we need to make sure that that builds into the tax rate. So we want to accommodate that, and to the mayor's point, then once we understand and we have a plan for that in place, you could absolutely remove it from this list.
So that's a decision that still has to be made. Mr. Griffin?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, a few items. Gave some thought to this spreadsheet, and I think when I provided that initial spreadsheet to Mr. Cummings, I didn't carry it over to the right side, so that's on me. Secondly, how this all came about is we knew we needed to do something with planning, and the way we had been going, I requested an analysis, as I mentioned before, of First Southwest, the Hilltop Securities, of a $40 million bonding per year, so $200 million. Got the numbers back, and your debt service, our debt service would go from $20 million to $37 million. The mayor and I and Director Cummings, Director Sullivan, we met and said that, you know, going from $20 million to $37 million for just debt service, even though we're heading towards a 10% debt service to operational budget target, which seems reasonable, seemed very painful. So we come up with the concept of $30 million a year. And what we saw was that we're not reducing our debt service as much as we would like, because all these projects came in. Even the high schools are already paid off, but everybody embraced it, and I'm appreciative of that, and that's why we're here today. That's those items. With regard to the hydro, those revenues inure to the benefit of the tax rate. So as long as you come to grips with, you know, if we're gonna get $1 million now, it's gonna not be $1 million next year. So you're gonna chase that. The parking, as Alderman Clemmons said, with a $15 million investment, you'd have rate shock across the city if you tried to implement it. But good concepts, because you may wanna have, it's a little bit of work to get them set up at the enterprise funds for things that have fees, certainly. And then finally, as Director Cummings and I were speaking many times, we have to find a way to get between changing the oil in the car and building a brand-new high school. I mean, and what I'm saying is, if we didn't do anything, we'd probably be bonding $40 million a year for 5 years, and we'd end up with $37 million. So just think about cutting off, increasing the million to 3.5, which is 1% on the tax rate, and you can actually do projects. And I've been on the CIC for 13 years, and it's painful to see all these people come in with, you know, gung-ho, and they've done the analysis, and you can't fund any of it. So I'm on board with that, and also on board with the matching, funding the matching of these significant grant-funded opportunities. So that's kind of in summary the plan. Now you're talking about making sure you don't go up to 30 million, doing the things Alderman Clemmons said, and we can do that in probably short order. I don't think that would be a long exercise, but those are the concepts that get most of the things that we've heard about every budget season. Boy, I wish we had a few bucks to change something that's broken. So this is the comprehensive plan, and I'm thankful that it happened here in my last year of full-time employment. Thank you.
Alderman Clemmons.
Yeah, thank you. Well, in regard, that's a good point, I think, about the hydro. And maybe we don't put an enterprise fund, but that doesn't mean, though, that you can't count on the revenue to pay for the debt service, right? And still eliminate that out of this equation, because you know it's gonna be offset. So but again, all of these things I think are good, but I think that they help us get to the point that Alderman Gouveia brought up, which is, how do we not spend all of this all the way up? Well, I think there are some things built in here that if we put the correct plan in place, we wouldn't necessarily be doing that, and then we would have that cap built in. So I think that's kind of a good direction, in my opinion, for this to go and look at. Because I think all of these things are worthy. The only thing that's missing from this list, in my opinion, is the fire station for the airport. And I'm wondering if that's not something that needs more study, because I've always thought that the airport fire station, if it was completely redone, could be overbuilt, and the people, the firemen that are in there now could take that building, and then as the budget grows, you can add companies to that and have the rest of the building filled, and that could service the entire northwest area. I say that because there's an access road that runs behind the airport that, if it was paved, would give the fire rescue fast access up to Amherst Street by following the airport road and then back that way. So I think that there are plans that I think that could be addressed with one fire station. So I don't think as much as I would want to put that on this, I don't think it's ready for prime time, but that would be like, if I had to rank everything, I would leave what's on this list and then put that one as the next order of business. That's my opinion.
Mr. Cummings.
So to that point, and I agree with Alderman Clemmons, in my email today, I actually used this as the example because of the very points that you're making. And the issue I have is, at this time, I can't represent to you that 15 million is a good number to use. I think it's a safe number, but I've seen, doing some study on this, I've seen total project costs for new fire stations swing wildly. And so a safe number at this time is $15 million. So I would say, if there is enough ambition to want to, rehabilitate and replace station number 5, I would argue then now is the time to prioritize it. Send us the message that we should look to pay cash for this conversation. I'm going to say $1 million would be more than enough to start a significant level of design. We would then be able to come back before you, and this would all happen through the joint infrastructure and fire commission. and then be able to inform you all as to what the total project cost would be based on some level of design, and then you could feel more comfortable authorizing a debt service number.
Alderman Dowd.
Yeah, and just want to remind people that the fire department is in the midst of a study, an engineering analysis of all the 6 stations. And that could change what we're looking at right now. I've been around and looked at all those stations with the chief and had the discussions, you know, it could end up that the Amma Street station, they say it's not worth putting money into it, it should be replaced. If the problem with the road behind the airport is it may take you several years to get through the environmental impact of paving that road through what somebody determined was wetlands. And the other problem is that right now, from the airport fire station, if there's an accident on Sharon Avenue and trucks can't get to Amherst Street, the response time is not good. One of the things that may be considered in that study is building a smaller one truck, possibly for expansion, station made out of wood like they did in Hudson, and not build a, you know, concrete building that's got everything in it. And so the most important thing with the fire department is response time. And if you cut that response time, if you make that response time too great, you can lose an entire house. So I think before any final analysis is made on how much we're spending on fire stations, we need to get the results of that report. That's why I'm saying that nothing is going to be sent on fire stations till at least late FY25, because they have to get the report here, it's going to be analyzed, and it's going to go through the fire commissioners, come back here, determine a plan of action of what they want to do with all their stations. I think the only imminent thing right now is the roof at Conant Road, which I think you have somewhere in here, right?
Yes.
So that leaks, and even though they're firemen, they do mind having water come pouring down on their heads. So until that report comes back, we won't know the condition of each station. Now, some of the newer stations, obviously, there's not going to be a lot involved, but it's going to say, okay, in this FY30 whatever, we got to replace the high vac system, even in these new Lake Street or East Hollis Street. But that's all going to be detailed in this engineering analysis report that we just funded and is in process of being developed. The other piece is like the school department, the engineering analysis for all the stations, all the schools, is they want to do a study much like the fire department's doing now. So they have something that says, okay, engineering says that this is the time period we have to plan for this at this school. So that it's not just, it's time, or we'd like to do it, or, so the more planning you do, the better you have an idea of how to spend the money.
Alderman T-Bone.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've watched a lot of these meetings, but I could have missed this. But one thing, 6, 7, 8 years ago, whenever it was, we put the paving program in, something that we desperately needed in the city. But there's something that else is desperately needed, is sidewalks. Was there a sidewalk plan put in here somewhere where, I thought some department or somebody was going around assessing each sidewalk and then maybe a plan, but I don't know how much that would cost. I assume it would be, there's a lot of sidewalk issues, like just walking around the city. The best neighborhoods, the worst neighborhoods, all have sidewalk problems. It's not just an inner city thing. Even if you go out to the suburbs of the city, you'll see sidewalks like this. So is that something that's been baked in here? And like I said, I could have missed it.
If I may.
Yes, Mr. Cummings.
So again, my recommendation would be is that would be something we would work with the department on and get it into their operational budget. And recognizing that there's that deferred capital maintenance need, and we could work towards increasing it slowly over time, but there needs to be a recognition that we would exceed guideline, and we would have to make sure we're modeling it appropriately.
Is there some assessment going on right now of the
Now,
sidewalks?
Director
right now?
Photo can enlighten us on
We
the,
have done an assessment of all the sidewalks citywide. We have not put that into a plan, but we're working on that now to
Awesome.
prioritize them.
That's fantastic, thank you.
Alderman Clemmons.
Yeah, I just want to state for the record that I agree with everything Alderman Dowd said, and in regards to the fire station up at the airport being a larger one, I would never advocate for that unless that road could be paved. So maybe the conversation is, how do we approach the airport authority to get it paved, and what would that take? Because even if it doesn't have, even if it did not have anything to do with the fire department future plans, I still feel that there would be a benefit to our public safety vehicles getting back and forth, so.
Any other questions, comments for Director Cummings or anyone else? All right, do you have anything else you want to try to cover now, today? You've only got about 10 more minutes.
And so to that end, if it's the pleasure of the group, I would suggest that there's not a need to meet again if we're in agreement with what is outlined here in draft form. I'd ask that it be accepted, and then that directive could be given to CFO Griffin and I to start to develop a plan based off of this. And we could submit that recommendation to the full Board of Aldermen, which is what the charge of this group is.
Alderman Clemmons.
Thank you. I would like to know more information about the offsets and a plan about the paving, the school capital maintenance. You said you were meeting with the school department. I'd like to see more of that, because again, my concern is going up to the 30 million is one thing, but if we know that there's stuff baked in there that would not actually get us to that point, then I feel more comfortable doing that. I think the hydro dam is one that definitely is. But if there's other things, I'd like to know what they are and how that would impact this before I'm ready to move forward.
Alderman Govea.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I agree with my colleague at large. I don't feel ready to make anything final yet. I think there's still some more information I'd like to see before we finalize this.
Alderwoman Clee.
Thank you. I'm in agreement with both of my colleagues that just spoke. And the other question I have is, I remember when we talked to the different groups and so on, there were certain items that we really didn't have a whole lot of choice that we had to do. I'd like to really know what those are again, because they have to be on it. You had, I know in one of the documents that you would send us, you did priority 1, 2, and 3. And I went through it, and I really couldn't create a priority 1, 2, and 3. I could create what my priorities were, saying that, these are musts. But I'd like to go back to knowing which ones we have no choice. And to be honest with you, I'm not sure if that's on this list or on the pay cash, but like the HVAC system for the City Hall, that to me is that's a must. We have to do that, and whether we're paying cash or whether we're bonding on it, that to me is something that there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So when I'm looking at priorities, I am looking at the garages. We can't let those fall down. So that's why I'd like to know which ones are the ones that we said that they're in imminent danger of us losing them. To me, the Amherst Street floor is a must. Right now, where they can't have the big truck there, and that always gives me a little angst, saying that's my ward, and knowing what they protect and so on. So I would like to know what those are. Thank you.
We're not going to get a number on that till this facility study is done, are we?
Correct.
Yeah.
But, may I?
There's this rough
Right.
500,000, but that's based upon not a lot.
Right, well, I think we have 1.5 million in that one, the Amherst Street floor.
That
But that includes the Conant Street as well.
Oh, that includes Conant Street as well, okay.
Conant Road with
Conant Road.
the roof.
The roof, which
But
again, that
how-
to me is as much as importance as the floor on because we don't want it to rain on them. So I still look at that 1.5 million.
And how did you allocate as between those? What were you thinking, just 750 each, or what were you doing there?
I used the number that the fire department gave me.
Which was,
I'm pretty sure it was 500,000 was for the roof, and then I think it was like 1 million for the
we went to
floor.
$1 million for the floor? Okay. Alderman Dowd.
And just one thing, I think when, I'm not on the committee, but when they feel that, the committee feels that this is ready for prime time, this is a guidance planning document. It would not take a motion or not be soliciting a motion from the Board of Aldermen to approve the spending plan. Every one of those projects would still have to come back to the full board for a bonding resolution.
Absolutely.
Yes, definitely. This is not an authorization of debt at all, it's just a, all right. Further information requested. Any other comments now? All right. I see people are here for the Budget Committee, so I will look to the President. Wilshire?
Motion to adjourn.
All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes, and the meeting is adjourned at 7:26 PM.
Right.